Welcome back to Soul Sugar Podcast. It is your host, Carrie. I'm here with Alexander Ailing.
Hello.
Round of applause for Alex, everyone.
Oh, that's very kind of you.
Today we are going to be chatting about intentional living. We are going to be chatting about slow living, how that can be beneficial to your life, simplifying things, but also we're going to talk a little bit about our homesteading journey and kind of what that's taught us about living in the countryside, and how sometimes when it seems like you're fully simplifying, you're also
complicating
things, but in a different practical way, and a way that you learn
to enjoy
more. But also, besides slowing down, living in the countryside, I want to just talk about slow living in general and just intentional living, because not everybody's moving out to the countryside and not everybody's interested in that. And there is a lot of different ways that you can live that life without having to do this huge life transition that we've done. But we do want to talk about that a little bit, because a lot of people who follow are also really interested in potentially having a life like that and want to know more about it too. So
just to kind of play off what you were just saying, obviously making the leap, deep diving is not necessarily what everybody's thinking about doing. It was a crazy decision that we made kind of almost 5 years ago now, in the height of the pandemic. And it was something we've been thinking about for a long time, wanting to live a more intentional, slower paced lifestyle in the countryside. And, it's come together, but it's been a journey. And it's one that I'm excited to talk about in this podcast.
Also, if I'm ever looking down at my phone, it's because I just want to make sure that we stay on track about what we're going to chat through. I want to talk about both of sort of our, origin stories. Not necessarily our origin stories, but what drove us to be interested in wanting to slow down? Like, what was it that was there a break? Was there a mental break? Was there... I know your story, but I think we can both chat about it.
I mean, I think for me, I was born and raised in San Diego, California, and I always had a connection to the ocean, but also just a connection to being outside in the outdoors. I grew up right next to a canyon, and it was like a little wild space. And my friends and I would always go down there. We would build forts and we would camp overnight, and we'd go on skunk patrol. And we would always be messing around outside. And then as a young kid, I was in what was called the Indian Guides back in the day, and then the Boy Scouts. And I ended up becoming an Eagle Scout and doing trips like that, and then going in the summertime to the Sierra Nevada mountains with my friends and going backpacking and fishing and camping. And so I've always had a desire, like a yearning, to be as close as I can to the wild. And I just love being outside and in the outdoors. And so I guess for me, like, the dream was always trying to find a partner who would be down for it, but B, a place to call our own that was, more removed from the big city. I've never been a big city person. Remember the first time I visited New York, I was overwhelmed, to be totally honest with you. And I understand maybe for a certain age bracket, being in the hustle and bustle in the big city is something that would be appealing. But every time I go to New York, I find myself in Central Park and, just sitting on a bench going, oh, cool. This is my place.
And that's a really good point, because when you talk about slow living and intentional living, you do think about nature and what it does for your being. Because if we do think about people in general and where we come from nature. We are nature. We are water. We are earth. We are part of this planet, and we come from it. And the fact that when we go outside and we take a deep breath, whether we're living in the city, Central Park is there for a reason. Central Park is there for people living in the city to go and be amongst trees and take a deep breath, because it's crucial for us living in concrete jungles like we were doing not too long ago in Los Angeles, to be able to have those moments. And we talked about this, I think, a little bit on our last podcast episode about, like, when we met, we really valued unplugging, but going to, like, our nearest mountain range. And I think for me, that also came from childhood. I remember some of my like most memorable moments in childhood were two that I remember really well when it comes to nature and feeling so at peace with it. And one would be like when we had so many rosemary bushes around our house in Phoenix, Arizona, where I was born. And so I spent my early years there. And when I would come inside the house, I would just smell of rosemary. And I just remember feeling so cozy with the smell of like such a beautiful scent of nature. And also I remember like laying in the grass and I would like look up at the trees and when the sunlight like peeks through the leaves and stuff. I remember just being so at peace in moments like that when I was a kid. And like so many different things could be going on with my family or whatever it might have been, but those moments for me were so peaceful, and that stuck with me always. Was like just being in that moment, looking through the leaves at the sun shining through and just seeing that like brilliant gold color coming through the leaves and them slowly moving and listening to the wind and just thinking, oh, being is such a miracle, and being able to be in a moment completely is such a wonderful experience. So I always held on to that as I grew older, and whenever I would see that, still to this day, I think about myself as a child and I think about like that peace that I find from nature. We both had that yearning to be closer to it. Mm-hmm. And I think once we were both living in LA and we were working really hard. Like when I look back to our time in LA, I just think about work. I think about being behind a computer. Mm-hmm. I think about not making time for like that much else. We had friends in the city, but we had our like small, maybe one or two good friends in the city, and we didn't really like extend beyond that because we didn't really make the time to. Now, not to just fast forward because we'll talk through all of that, but like now we're very different when it comes to being social. Like we're very yes people. We're always saying yes to things that come up, and we just slow down. And I think everything that we've done and put into practice since kind of reaching that breaking point in Los Angeles and being like, we need to break free from this cycle. Once we made that decision, and breaking free from a cycle doesn't mean that you need to move. Like, what are we, 7,000 miles away from where we originally?
But it does help.
It does help, but you don't have to break free like that at all. You could just reach a breaking point and stay exactly where you are, but just like reanalyze and reconfigure your mind and lifestyle.
I want to go back to one of the things you said when you were talking about like your memories of smell. There is a really strong connection with memory and the olfactory system, smelling, the sense of smell. So it's funny that you associate your childhood memories with the smell of rosemary. And for me, my childhood memories, it's like the smell of the canyon, like coastal chaparral, California coastal chaparral. I don't remember where I heard it, but supposedly they've done studies and there's 3 sounds that you need to have every day in order to feel a sense of well-being. And those are the sound of the wind in the trees, the sound of water, running water or the beach, and then the sound of birdsong. And when I think of urban living, especially in extreme examples, places I've traveled to, whether that's Tokyo or Delhi in India, that are devoid of those sounds, that is when I think there's like a creeping low-level feeling of unease that just is constantly running in the background of our brains. And I think when I think about how globally and in the West especially, there's this huge surge of mental health problems, I think it's a lot of it could be boiled down to the fact that we are just not interacting with the natural world as much anymore. We aren't getting those 3 sounds on the daily basis. And, when I think, if in my brain, if I'm just like, what does peace feel like? What does it sound like? Well, it feels like the wind a warm breeze on your skin. It sounds like the wind rustling leaves in the trees and bird song and running water. And, it looks like the sunshine twinkling through the overhead from a tree, and you're laying in the grass or whatever. So like, I think that those actual experiences and emotions, they're all connected. And so I guess when I think about extreme urban living, and I've done that, we've lived in apartments, we've lived in the city, but when I was living like that, I would either need to like escape as often as possible, or really just focus on working. And then I got to a point where I was like, oh my God, I'm like on the verge of burnout here. I need to make some drastic changes.
We live in a do more culture. So that looks like working as much as possible, trying to get to the next big milestone in our careers, and really never feeling like what we have is enough. And I know that's a big conversation, and there's so many reasons behind all of that, and it's not always the fault of the individual. It's a cultural thing. It's a societal thing, for sure. And I think that there's ways in which we can navigate that as people. And I want to, now that we've kind of touched on all of that, I want to talk about ways in which we feel like we've been able to shift ourselves into living a more intentional lifestyle. Like, what are some like practical, tangible things? Because, we've sat here and talked a lot about, seeing the light coming through the trees and all that kind of stuff. And that's where the foundation lies. But then there's all of like the practical things that you can put into effect in your life to see these changes and to feel them. And I think for us, some of the, like I said, you don't have to move 7,000 miles away from your home. You don't even have to move to the countryside. What I mentioned very briefly in the last podcast episode was that we decided to build a vegetable garden when we lived in Los Angeles, and we were living in an urban sprawl, suburban area of Los Angeles.
But we had a yard. We had a good sized grass backyard.
Yeah. But I actually, now that you say that, just want to like push it back a little bit even further and talk about living in an apartment where you don't even have a patch of grass. I think for me, it started there, where I was like, okay, as simple as this sounds, like getting a pot of basil, getting a pot of rosemary, going to my farmer's market, or just things that can kind of make you feel like more connected to local produce, to growing food. And as simple as it sounds, it might, for me it did, ignite something in you that makes you go, what other ways can I live a little bit more intentionally and have these things at my fingertips, where I'm not like going to the grocery store and buying rosemary every time I need to make something that has a recipe with rosemary, and I buy it in a plastic carton, and it's costly, and instead I'm just going to give this plant inside my home nurture. Like, I'm going to give it water, and it's going to be there for when I need it.
Plant mama, taking care of a plant. As simple as it sounds. I think for me, the seed was planted during my travels. I traveled extensively for nearly a decade of my life, shooting videos and a television show and content all around the world. And as those travels kind of evolved, it got more and more kind of food centric. As a person who loves to eat and loves to cook, obviously the next stage in that evolution is learning to garden, learning to grow your own food, harvesting your own food, whether that's fishing or hunting, creating a relationship with a local farmer. And I think that as we've kind of evolved in our journey to where we are now, so much of that has been about food sufficiency. I don't want to say self-sufficient because we still go to the grocery store, we still buy milk and we buy coffee and we buy all sorts of things like that. But having some autonomy in the food system, and I think especially after witnessing, grocery stores empty in COVID and supply chain disruptions and all of the kind of chaos in the food system that we witnessed just a few years ago, not to mention the inflation that we've all lived through in the years after that. Growing your own food, learning to grow food, and learning to harvest food is just a natural progression in becoming a more capable and more sufficient person. I also feel that when you grow your own food and you harvest something, a vegetable, especially when you've grown it from seed, there is a feeling where you're so excited about it. Totally. We just harvested a couple of heads of lettuce from our garden that we planted from seed like 3 or 4 months ago. And it's like the crunchiest, most beautiful, totally organic head of iceberg lettuce that we've been using for salads and growing strawberries or cucumbers or whatever it is, tomatoes. I don't know how to say this in a sense where if I didn't have that connection to growing food and making meals and sharing that with people that I love and my friends, I feel like it would be a sadder existence. Like if I were purely dependent on somebody else, if I had no idea where my food comes from. And I think that our generation is kind of waking up to this, and we're saying like we want to have a more direct connection with what we eat.
It's a disconnect. You're disconnected, and being disconnected is a sadder, I don't want to know if sad is the right way to put it, but I hear what you're saying.
I mean, obviously everybody has their own choice in this matter, and I'm not trying to like project, judgments on
people who aren't doing
people
this.
who aren't
Absolutely.
growing any of their own food or have never grown some food.
But there's definitely an interest in it, and one of our top performing episodes on this podcast is how growing your own food can improve your life. And so looking back at that over the years, I said, okay, well, I think it's important that we talk about this again, because we spoke about it when we were in Los Angeles, and it's really evolved and changed for us, and it's really been implemented into our lives in different ways. But what's interesting about what you were saying was that, yeah, being disconnected does have an effect on us that we don't really sometimes realize in the moment, and being able to the simple joys. And I think that that's really important in intentional living, in slow living, is to some people, I get it. This type of content, this information is not for you. And so for those people, they've probably already clicked out of this video because they're like, okay, we're talking about being in nature and growing our own food. And that's okay, because it's not the type of lifestyle for everyone. Not everyone is interested in it. I remember in one of my gardening YouTube videos, somebody commented and said, "Are you so poor that you have to grow your own food?" And that
mentality is the problem, though.
I wasn't only shocked, but I was sad, and I wasn't offended in any way, because I didn't take offense to that at all. I felt like deeply sad that someone would say that when we're talking about something as simple as learning to grow food that we consume. And it doesn't mean that somebody doesn't afford food, but now they know where their food's coming from. And how awesome is that? And they have it there for them. And this whole podcast episode is not going to be about growing food, but I think it's a really important part of our intentional living and part of our like slow living lifestyle.
One of the things that food and growing food and being in connection with food systems does, though, is that it viscerally connects you to seasonality. And when you're connected to seasonality, when you're connected to the seasons and you're paying attention to how the world is changing around us all the time and how we're always in this constant slow shift from one season to another, that in itself connects you to life and to the cycle of life. And I think that's kind of why I feel that a connection to food, whether it's as simple as like if you're just getting started, if you've never grown anything and you're going, hey, yeah, maybe I should try to grow something, like buying some herbs and planting them in your windowsill in your kitchen. If you're in an apartment, you can grow basil, or you can grow thyme or oregano or whatever it is. And just like having something that you got to remember to water and like take care of and put in the sun, and seeing how that process in itself gives a sense of like grounding and a sense of well-being, is really important. Because I think, just going back to that comment that random person left on one of your videos, I think that that's the legacy of a successful brainwashing campaign by the industrial food complex, by selling it to you that, no, why would you waste your time growing your own food? Oh, that's for poor people. That's for people who, need to touch the dirt. Let us do it. And then it's like, okay, yeah, that sounds good. I can do other things with my time. And then all of a sudden we wake up one day and it's like, oh, actually the truck didn't arrive at the grocery store today, so there's no food. And whoops, in that process of mass industrial food production, we're talking about the use of so many different chemicals and pesticides and herbicides and all these additives that are ending up in our food, even in food that is being sold as organic in nice grocery stores. They're doing tests, and there's still substances on those foods, glyphosate, and all of these things that are now coming out and being proven to have adverse health effects on humans.
One more point on that comment that I got. It makes me think about rich, the word rich in life, and the definition of rich, because in our life, and this is something we talk about really regularly, rich means something entirely different than what you would think, like rich being like big house, nice cars, lots of money in the bank, and
designer brand clothing, fashion, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, which is all, there's nothing wrong with any of those things, because I love fashion. I love having like things in my life that bring me joy. But the definition of rich to us these days is to be able to be present when possible, and fully present when we can, and to be as present as we can, especially now that we have Eliana.
Time. In control of our time.
Control of time.
I just finished reading this book called The Psychology of Money, and in one of the it was a really good read. And one of the chapters talked about what his definition of wealth was. And it wasn't that it's not related to money. It was having enough money to be able to be completely in control of your time and making the choices which allow you to gain control over your time. Because at the end of the day, the most valuable resource in life is time, because it's the one thing that we don't get to buy more of. We already have a clock ticking on both of our lives. We don't know when it's going to end. So having the ability to be in control of your time, to wake up each day and choose how you want to spend it, that I believe is the true definition of wealth or of rich.
Success.
Yeah.
I agree. And this doesn't mean, like, obviously we're content creators, and we did work to create this more flexible lifestyle. And we have done YouTube for over a decade, and we've put a lot of work into creating this lifestyle, but also we've put work into creating a lifestyle in which we can continue having flexibility. And, even if you're at a 9-to-5 job, that doesn't mean that that you don't have success, because when you look at somebody who is able to pick up their kid from school. If you're able to pick up your kid from school, like that's success as well. If you have that, if you're able to make that time management and to be able to be present, because people have to have jobs, right? This is our society. We have to work. We work, we go into our office and we sit behind our computer. We're not spending the entire day in the garden frolicking through.
There's very little frolicking that happens. No. I wish there was a little more frolicking, to be fair, but
I'd say there's a pretty good amount of frolicking.
Carrie frolics a lot. You're a frolicker. I frolic. We frolic. We're frolicking.
There's a good amount of frolicking.
There's a healthy amount of frolicking.
You don't have to be ashamed of frolicking, okay?
There's a healthy amount.
Yeah. But there's also a healthy amount of time spent working behind a computer, and sometimes on really beautiful days where you're looking out the window and
those are the hardest.
I want to go outside. And yeah, we work from home, and yes, we have flexible schedules, and yes, to us that feels like success because we can make those choices.
That word success is subjective, right? And so is rich, and so is wealth. Mm-hmm. All of these things are subjective. The definition of them is different for every single person. Every single person's life is different. Their circumstances are different. Their dreams and desires are different. So I guess, we're talking about what we feel resonates with us and the choices that we've made to get to a place that it feels in tune with what we want right now on a life. And that's our subjective interpretation of it.
I wanted to make sure that we talked about practical things and takeaways to embrace. Maybe just, doing not, I don't want to say doing less, but just having a more like clear mind. And I think the whole world is burnt out. Like that's just my overall feeling of energy for everyone.
Global burnout.
It's global burnout, and we all understand why. And that's why I think that there's such a shift, specifically in our generation, the millennial generation, wanting to get back to the land, wanting to bake that sourdough, wanting to grow vegetables and have a vegetable garden and have chickens and have that lifestyle. And we get that, obviously, because we're living that. But things like decluttering in your life and spending more time in nature and creating rituals around daily tasks like making tea and planting seeds. These are all things that like you can implement into your daily life when you're not living out in a homestead to just feel like you have these rituals. Rituals are so important. And you were talking about daily tasks, and I was saying how they can become overwhelming. But if we slow things down and we live in the present moment and we do each task, but we give ourselves the time to intentionally go about these different processes. And that's why like cooking, when you're cooking from your like rosemary that's on your windowsill or whatever, is like that makes it more fun.
I made a lasagna the other night, and we have a little windowsill basil and a windowsill oregano. And yeah, it's so fun, like as I'm layering the lasagna, to be able to like pluck the basil leaves off and place them into the dish. One of the books, I've read 2 books that have definitely impacted my approach to living. And I think I read both of them before we moved here too. The first one is Hygge, which is, it's Hygge, and it's a Danish word, and it kind of translates loosely to like coziness or the art of coziness. And it's like the secrets of Danish living. And I guess Denmark is one of the happiest countries in the world. And then the other one that I read was Ikigai, and it's the secrets of Japanese longevity and their approach to living. And there's a big overlap kind of in both of them, in that they go about the tasks in their lives with this positive intention and with a slowness and a meticulousness. Like they're paying attention to what they're doing, and they're doing it with a desire, a positive desire to do it well. and they're not rushing it. And I think there's something about that really affects the way that you live when you start to slow down and you say, okay, like I don't need to be worried right now. I don't need to be anxious. I don't need to be rushing. Sometimes you just got to close your eyes and take a deep breath, because like it's easy to get overwhelmed. I still get overwhelmed sometimes, especially as new parents. But you could just kind of like take a second and go, okay, cool. That's not how I actually feel. It's just like me reacting. You know?
And that is such a good point, like taking a step back and taking a breath, but also creating an environment for yourself. Like what we've done is we've created this environment for ourselves to be able to step outside and be like, whoa, okay. I love that you brought up Danish living, because that book really does show you how you can implement. These are the happiest people in the world, and what they do, what their rituals, like we were just discussing, are like, but also what their environment is like. You can live in
I feel
the
like
middle.
you thrive in that too. Like when you read that book, you're like, oh my God, yes, like candles and low
like,
light and all these
This
things.
is everything I've been doing. I live like a Dane.
There's words for it.
Yeah.
Big.
So low light, not using the overhead light, having like lamps around the house. As soon as the sun goes down in our house, I'm flicking on like a pink Himalayan salt light in our bedroom and in our bathroom. And I'm like, do not turn on that main light, because it's a wind down time. Having a candle lit completely changes the energy of a room. And just little things like that, like having a cup of tea with a candle and a low lamp on, like all of these things together, and coming into your home. And one of the rituals or recommendations in the book was like having something baking in the house, so that when you walk into the house, it just smells like, sourdough bread. It's just cozy. And being cozy and warm and safe is the best way to live intentionally. And that doesn't need to, you can do that anywhere you are in the world.
I always just say to Carrie, I'm like, oh, the cozy queen returns. She strikes again, because you are so great at like styling a space and making it feel inviting and warm and cozy. Whereas sometimes, kind of as a man, I don't like, my brain doesn't immediately go to all of those things. And I don't know, sometimes I leave and I'll come home, and when I left, the house was kind of a disaster. And then I come home and like, there's a bouquet of flowers on the table. There's a candle. There's like some soft music. Something's baking. It's probably brownies, or a loaf of sourdough bread.
Fudgy ones too.
And and I'm just like, oh my God, like what has happened? What have I walked into? But it's fantastic.
There's nothing that brings me more joy than like having a moment and looking around and being like, this is my sweet, simple life, and I can create this, and I have the opportunity to make it smell good and put flowers inside the house, and that just brings me joy. And when I'm organizing a space, I think about, when somebody sits here, they're gonna want to put their foot up. So like, I'm gonna put this
ottoman
puff here so that they can just put their foot there. Or if somebody sits here, they're going to want to put a drink down here. So like, what can I do to make just
facilitate the chill,
the flow and the chill? Because we all need that, and especially in our homes. Like, there's a reason why there's these retreats we go to for nature, right? Because we need it. There's a reason why we want to nest in our homes, whether we're having children or not. You can still nest if you're not a mother. Like, nesting into our homes, it's so crucial and important for our well-being, for our mindset, for our mental health, because it is the place where we come to recharge. And for us, we just took it to the extreme, and we were like, well, we're also going to just like move on a little plot of land and like make it so we can have a nature retreat anytime.
Every day.
All the time. As I look out our window and the bumblebee is on that little purple flower. And this whole time I've been talking about the light through the tree. I've just been looking out that
right there,
that window. And It's another thing. Like, follow the things that bring you joy.
And that could be different for every single person. But at the end of the day, life's too short to not try to forge a path in the direction of the things that you love.
Also, let yourself slow down and play in whatever capacity that is. You can, and you're right, everyone has a different want or desire, and it looks like something different for everybody. But I had a moment with us the other day, and we can kind of wrap it up here, but I wanted to talk about the other day in the garden. We just slowed down. We just said, it was a long summer night here in New Zealand. The sun doesn't go down till like 9:30 at night. And we had actually just put Eliana down to sleep, and there was still sunlight. We went into the garden, and we were just, as the sun was going down, like harvesting berries. And there's so much we could have been doing. We could have been cleaning the house. We could have been, watching something because she's sleeping, or doing more work. You feel like you just need to get, when you have a kid, you just feel like there's so much you can do when they're sleeping. And we just let go, and we went out into the garden. We were harvesting berries, and we just had such a fun moment together because we just decided to let go of everything and just slow down. And we're harvesting berries, which is so therapeutic as well. I believe for all human beings, specifically because we were cave people at one point, and we did this, and it's just it's part of us. And
before candy, there were berries.
Yeah, so we're harvesting berries and talking, and we start like flirting, or you were flirting with me.
And Carrie's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, I believe it's called flirting. I know.
He was just being like, I don't know what you were saying. I can't remember now, but we've like felt that energy, and it was just beautiful because we hadn't had like energy that light for a while, because we're just, we have an infant that's under 1, and we've had, I was like, we had some fun moments when I was pregnant. I was a happy pregnant lady, and some reason my hormones made me think Alex was the funniest person in the world.
It has nothing to do with hormones. I am one of the funniest people on this planet.
You're funny, but for some reason my pregnancy like made me laugh at every single thing, and I
was into it.
I remember thinking to myself, he's not that funny normally. What's going on with my hormones? But having her, we hadn't had we've had so many joyous moments with her as the three of us, right? But there was this specific feeling, that this like lightness, just the two of us, like, and you flirting with me, and it was all because we just like let go of everything, and we just were doing a simple task together, but it was removed from everything, and we just let ourselves let go. And it's things like that. We talk about slowing down and intentional living because of these moments, because it's good for your relationships, it's good for your heart, it's good for your soul, it's good for your mind, it's good for your mental health, to just take moments where you just disconnect from things. Thank you all so much for listening to this episode. It's been so fun to be back. And if you want to find out more about what we're doing on the daily, you can follow the podcast at Soul Sugar Co. Or you can follow Carrie Rad on Instagram, Alexander Ailing on Instagram. We both have our YouTube channels.
It's all linked down there.
Alexander Ailing and Carrie Rad. And if you enjoyed this episode, please review the podcast. You can do so on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts, and I think anywhere you get your podcasts. And yeah, come give us a follow, the podcast on Instagram. And
if you're just tuning in for the first time here on YouTube as well, subscribe.
Yeah, subscribe on YouTube for sure. And thank you all for listening. Soul Sugar Podcast, like sugar for your soul. We will talk to you guys all very soon.
Ciao.
Bye.